Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Cup of Hope with Hope Against Trafficking and the Michigan Abolitionist Project. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to join in over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to our panel by typing in your questions in the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them at the end of the session. Now I'd like to go ahead and welcome today's panelists. We have Tracy Kavelligan, who is the Executive Director for Hope Against Trafficking, Hannah McPeak, the Education Director for Hope Against Trafficking, Emily Johnson, Program Coordinator at the Michigan Abolitionist Project, and Chrissy Hempel is our guest today, and she's the Program Director for Hope Against Trafficking. Chrissy has been the Program Director for Hope Against Trafficking since 2018. She's been an inner city missionary for 11 years and received awards from the Detroit Police and Wayne County State for being a liberator of those enslaved in trafficking. Chrissy attended nursing school at Wayne State University before starting her missionary work and is the proud mom to 3 children, ages 12, 14, and 16. Thank you, ladies.
Thanks for being here, Chrissy.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
So how's everyone doing this
doing?
past week? How have you been doing? I was on week. What were you guys up to?
Pretty good. I guess getting the hang of the quarantine life. I think I finally have gotten used to it a little bit, and now we're like heading out of it, so hopefully, kind of a strange time to, yeah. I've been flexible, being flexible.
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time at Metro Parks with my kids, so that's been fun. And in the water, my dog pulled me into the Detroit River one day, so it's been super fun.
The Detroit River?
Yeah, it was cold.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine.
Oh, man.
I went my foot in the lake. It's cold.
Yeah.
But the sun's out, you guys. I mean, hopefully we're headed in the right direction with regard to weather, more sun,
I think it's
more
supposed
warmth.
to be 80s next week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yay. That'll be good.
80s
That'll be good.
70s, yeah.
Well, when the weather comes out, everybody comes out.
Yeah, that actually I have to say has been really nice. Like going outside, taking walks, and just seeing all the neighbors and everybody out and about, getting a little bit of socialization that way,
Sure.
you know, respecting the social distance. That has been nice. So the excuse is always, oh, I'm going to take the dog for a walk. And then you like take a little longer because you're just stopping and like everybody's talking to everyone. So,
Right.
but so again, Chrissy, thank you so much for being with us. We're really excited to continue the dialogue about lure tactics of predators. Last week, we kicked it all off and sort of talked about what trafficking was and how these lures, how these traffickers are using these lures to exploit the vulnerable. When we talk about human trafficking, we're talking about individuals who have been induced to perform sexual acts or involved in labor activity through force, fraud, or coercion. So by no choice of their own have they been sort of brought into a life of servitude and work that they're not, excited about doing, to say the least. And but we don't talk enough about, I don't feel, about how it is that this happens. And so we just want to keep bringing this conversation into the light, to whether it be to help with prevention, to help with intervention, any of those avenues of help. So that's why we're here, and that's why we're talking about this. And Chrissy, we have you here, and we're just so grateful that you're with us. But the question to you with regard to lures, if you could kick this off with, is right, what you've seen and the women that you've worked with, what are the most common ways that individuals are being lured or recruited into trafficking, by what you've seen?
I think with everything I've seen, you really hit it on the nose when you said vulnerabilities. mostly what I've seen is people who have addiction issues and mental health issues being preyed on. Traffickers, unfortunately, are very smart, and they're usually very charismatic and very likable. And, so they buddy up with people who, have addictions already, or they have mental health issues, or they have a bad history. And, they might be the one who actually introduces them to the drugs. And then once they're dependent on something, that's their huge vulnerability. And a lot of people like to judge people who are addicted to drugs, but coming off of them isn't an easy thing. It's not something that you can just toss to the side and detox from and go on with life like it never happened. Once it's in your system and you're addicted to it, it's not, just something you can walk away from that easily. And then you add a trafficker into the picture who's also mentally keeping you under that control, and it's a whole nother ball game at that point.
Yeah, that really makes sense, because you see like, I think the numbers show that the majority of survivors of trafficking do struggle with substance use disorders. But that somehow
absolutely, because I don't know how they could go through what they're going through without being, numb in some way. I mean, the physical pain, the mental pain, the emotional pain, the fear, the anxiety, all of it is, just so awful that most of them do have to be on something to, be able to survive it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you sort of touched on something with regard to substance use disorders, and that's sort of like this culture, how our society looks at individuals who struggle with addiction. That this was something that they did to themselves. We sort of overlook the fact that they could have very well been manipulated and lured into the behavior as a result. So that's a good point, that we sort of have to like open our eyes to a different mindset when it comes to how we view individuals who've been lured and are struggling with substance use disorders.
Yeah, and the way I look at these individuals, and really the way I look at just about anything in life and anybody in life, is, what did they go through? What happened to them to get them to this point? Not what did they do, but what happened to them. I think that's a huge switch in perspective when you look at people with that mindset and wonder, what's in their past that's brought them to this point. And once you can start getting to that, you can start helping that person, heal those past hurts, and just really understand and have more empathy for what they're going through and why they're in the place that they're in.
I like that you brought that up, Chrissy. Just the whole issue of the language that we use can be so powerful on how we view people and treat people and view a situation, just by what we call it.
Yeah. And, it doesn't have to, somebody's history or past doesn't have to be some major traumatic experience to lead them to a point of wanting to use or being in a vulnerable place. It could be a single parent home. That doesn't mean that one parent is abusive or bad. It just means that something's missing in that home that creates a vulnerability for that child, because that child is missing something. If there's not a father in the home, or a father in the child's life telling a daughter how beautiful she is all the time, the first man who walks up to her and starts telling her she's beautiful, she's going to just fall in love instantly, because nobody's ever been there to tell her that. So, it doesn't have to be some catastrophic issue. It can be the simplest things. It can be low self-esteem, which I know most teenage girls and preteen girls struggle with self-esteem just due to our, media and the way, women are portrayed, in music videos and things like that. They have this false sense that they have to live up to the way these people look. And so it just kills their self-esteem. And that alone, traffickers, like I said, they're smart. They know what to look for. They can tell when a girl has low self-esteem, because he'll go talk to her, and if she's not making eye contact, he can tell right there that, she's not confident. And it would be easy for him to talk his way into her life or his life. So.
Well, and those are good points too. We also have the people who move a lot, and when they move a lot and they're always the new person, they're also very, you see a lot of this, like with military brats or the military life. A lot of that because the people are constantly moving. They're mainly it's the dad who's on TDY or remote, so there isn't a father in the home. It is kind of like a single household, single person, single mother household, and the person's very vulnerable, both the boys and the girls, vulnerable as they're looking to seek some attention.
Yeah, and when I say girls, I mean, sometimes I forget to say boys, but boys are just as susceptible, you know, to trafficking as girls are. It's just I've worked more with girls and women than I have boys, so sometimes I misspeak on that. But yeah, there's no doubt that boys and men are just as easy targets as girls and women are.
Yeah, so we talked about the vulnerabilities because that, I mean, you know, the question sometimes comes up is how and why are these lure tactics so effective? We touched on that. We touched on like the vulnerabilities. They're effective because the lure tactics are specifically aimed toward manipulating somebody who is dealing with the vulnerability. And I think you make a really good point, Chrissy, and when you say like it doesn't have to be anything catastrophic. It could just be what may be a dysfunction in someone's family or in someone's community, or you know. So that's what makes these lure tactics so effective.
Well, and they're also effective because, you know, so many people are so fixated on figuring out how to remove dysfunction, you know, and there's just a lot of situations and a lot of families where the dysfunction is not going to be removed. So the next step is teaching your children how to deal with you know, how to identify if somebody is trying to lure them into something and what to do if they are being lured into it. You know, having your kids be prepared for those sorts of situations is of the utmost importance, because all through your life you're going to experience dysfunction here or there, and you've just got to know how to handle it when it comes your way, and how to, you know, notice it in a friend so that you can report it to somebody, things like that.
And okay, so I was going to say that's what's so important. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. Sorry.
I was going to say, well, that's what's so important. Well, why we're doing this is that the awareness and the education, looking at the resources, understanding, getting the tools in place, because Chrissy hits the nail on the head. We're not going to be able to change dysfunction. I mean, that's, you know, people can work on it themselves, you know, to where they are spiritually or physically or mentally, whatever. But a child's not going to be able to understand this. They're not going to change a dysfunctional household. Even adults who challenges can't change any dysfunction. So we need to understand, you know, and understand what the lures are, who try to do as best we can to give them the resources to work through that. And that's
yeah, and it is possible, because I know, you know, like Kendra said in the introduction, I have 3 kids, and my 12-year-old son, his friends even call me and say, you know, one just called me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, you know, this girl was offered drugs for a sex act at school, you know. So even my 12-year-old son's friends know what to do, because they're at my house enough, so poor kids just get to hear it constantly. But you know, the point is if you say something enough times, a kid is going to absorb it and they're going to learn what to do. And you know, I think that's just such an important thing. So even if you are a single parent in a bad situation, it doesn't mean that you can't protect your kids.
That's so good. Like, you have to be talking about it. I love that that you bring that up, because the question that oftentimes comes up is like, well, how do we deal with this? What do we do to detect this? How do you detect it? You know, and then how do you intervene? And so, can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
What are some of the telltale signs, I guess, of this kind of activity?
I think a lot of times with younger people who are being targeted, you know, and all the way like up into the 20s, you know, you might see an older man or an older woman. There's a lot of women who are recruiting victims as well. You know, they may be befriending a younger person, and they may be, you know, buying them gifts that seem a little ridiculous, you know, and new clothes, and convincing them to sneak out of their house so that they can hang out, or trying to distance them from their other friends, and isolate them from other family members and things like that. and that's always a huge sign. And, just watching your kids' body language, and talking to them every day and asking them, you know, hey, what's going on at school? Or who is this friend? And where'd you meet them? And, just having conversations with your kids. And most moms, especially, have those instincts to read their kids when they're, full of it or, making something up. You can usually tell and jump on it right away. And another thing I tell parents, like, there's no reason for your child to have privacy on their phone. My kids have absolutely no privacy on their phone. There's no reason for it. I don't have privacy on my phone. My kids take it constantly. So why should my kids have it? So if I have a concern about one of my kids, I will absolutely take their phone and I will go through everything. Or I'll use I have an app that's connected to all of my kids' phones that I can see all of their messages, all of their social media friends and messages, even deleted ones. There's technology out there where you can really track your kids and track who they're talking to and what they're talking about.
And that's another point, is if you see your kid with a phone that you didn't give to them, because that's another tactic, is that they will give them a phone so that they that special connection with their boyfriend,
Yeah. And a lot of the signs too are just the typical signs of any type of abuse, lack of caring about hygiene all of a sudden, a drop in grades, a sudden switch in how social, somebody is or isn't, things like that.
And those signs some of them can be detectable during the process of being lured. When someone is starting to be lured, I like how, one of the more obvious ones is like, they're carrying a phone that you didn't get them, Tracy, you brought that up, or, they're wearing jewelry or clothing that just doesn't match their age, or that they're interacting with someone older. Just that in and of itself. I mean, it's one of the things that I'm always saying is like, I don't care who you are. If somebody older than you, much older than you, is talking to you, that's just never okay. Or as a parent or as an observer, like, that is never okay. It's just not. And there's no need for an older person to be befriending someone younger. It's just not normal.
Well, the thing is too, we also have to keep in mind, I have teenagers and they go through that stage where they want to rebel, and you have to determine on, is this just regular rebelling teenage behavior, or is this something we need to be more concerned about? So there's some delicate things you have to be careful about, because we want to teach them, how to be mature and make good decisions. So we want them to make mistakes while they're in our household, but then we also we're very aware of what's happening. And so sometimes the signs, so don't freak out. Sometimes you think, oh no, my kid's, being lured into something, and it could just be regular teenage rebellion. But the point is you need to be aware of it. And it doesn't even have to be your child. You could be a teacher with your students. You could be an aunt with your nieces and nephews. I mean, it can you can have college age kids are very vulnerable, college age women, because they need money. They might decide, oh, look at this boyfriend, or look at this. So I mean, it's not just parent and child, it's all relationships around you. If someone's acting differently than you're aware of, and you're seeing these kinds of signs, then maybe it's good to have a conversation with them about, lures and predators and things of that sort.
Right. And you bring up a good point, like another vulnerability of people needing money, especially like during this crisis with the COVID-19. A lot of people out of work. There's a lot of people who are really struggling. And there's a lot of people who are all stuck in a house together. And some of these people are stuck with abusive people. And it wouldn't take much for a domestic abuse situation to turn into a trafficking situation during this time. And I know a lot of the women who are working in strip clubs as dancers are now, trying to make money out on the streets because they have nowhere else to go. So, that's the other probably largest vulnerability besides, mental health and addiction, is needing money for something. And then once you get wrapped up into it, it's hard to get out of. So, and there's a lot of family members who traffic people right out of their own home. So
that's a really good point. Like with COVID-19, I mean, that
the question of, how is that now affecting trafficking and just in general, manipulation, mistreatment, abuse. And I think you hit it on the nose that, vulnerabilities are just increased. There is an increased level of need. There's an increased level of cleanness, and, so those things are really going to impact how someone responds to those around them. And if, so that's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is everybody in the world is vulnerable. Some people are more vulnerable than others, though. And, those are the ones that, humanity just needs to start looking out for each other. This whole idea that we shouldn't be snitching on people and all that garbage, it's silly. If I see somebody who I think is, getting into a bad situation, I feel like it's, my duty to tell somebody or talk to them or, see if I can help them because, I don't know what's going on with them. One of my favorite sayings is you don't know what you don't know. And, we need to start stepping into these situations and just having these conversations. And one of the easiest things you can do is, when you see somebody on a street corner, and they look like they're looking for work that night, instead of judging them or, thinking that, they're an awful person for what they're doing, why don't you pull over and just ask them if there's anything you can do to help them or anything like that. So
yeah, what
Hannah I was going to say, Hannah, I remember one of the ones we talked about, and you brought this up, and I think Chrissy just reminded me, it's that everybody people put labels on people and they judge them and they don't realize time in history they could be in that situation. And you had brought up that example, like if you're traveling in another country, I mean, you're strong, you got this sense of security that you think you can take care of yourself, and all of a sudden you're in a place where you don't speak the language, or you might have been somewhere you're lost, and now you are vulnerable. So you could be vulnerable at any state of your life and not even have the typical things we just talked about, where you might be needing money, or you might be in a dysfunctional family or something like that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that came to mind that I wanted to bring up, I think when Chrissy was talking, I can't even remember how I made this, where this came from, but I think it's important to note that I think, at this point, when actually Tracy was talking about it, how, with teenagers, you have to kind of be careful as far as, are they going to make these assumptions? You don't have to jump to conclusions because it might be just normal teenager activity. But here's the thing. I think you're always safe when you see a change in baseline behavior. So these are people that right? This is your community. So it could be your posse, the people you hang out with. It could be your kids, your friends, whoever, but know them well enough to know their baseline behavior, right? So if there's something outside of that baseline behavior, an outlier, then it never hurts to engage in a conversation about it, right? I mean, it could end up being nothing, but it could end up being the beginnings of something. And so when you can and the challenge is always, for me, like to engage in these conversations, to create safe spaces just to talk about things. It could be, your kid just wanted to color their hair pink. I mean, out of nowhere, they just wanted to color their hair. I mean, it could have been the most innocent thing. You just don't know, right? I mean, somebody who's always, liking certain activities and now no longer wants to engage in those. Well, that should be a trigger for all of us to think, okay, let's have a conversation about that. What's going on now that they don't want to do that anymore? And it could be a simple thing like, my teammate treats me bad. Okay, let's talk about that. And in those conversations, you begin to equip your kids on how to deal with dysfunction. Like I think Chrissy's saying, like, you can't get rid of dysfunction. You can't get rid of the fact that people are going to have vulnerabilities. I mean, those are realistic things that every single person is going to have to navigate through, right? But if there's people around them that are willing to go down that path with them, that are willing to take the risk and engage in that conversation, because sometimes it takes courage to do that. It's easier just to drive by, like you're saying, you see somebody on the street that you can see is struggling. It's just easier to keep going because you've got other things going on in your life. But the harder route is being willing to stop and just ask the questions and to go there with someone. Because maybe more often than not, it won't be anything big. But that one time that it is, you would maybe have the opportunity then to step in and be that person that could do something about what could come down the road.
Right.
So that's like, I think that's one of the biggest goals with this, is just like through this cup of hope, is that it's never too late. It's never too late to begin these conversations and just keep having them, no matter what and where and when and with whom. These conversations need to be happening.
Yeah, and if we all start talking to our kids now, we'll have a whole generation of adults who know how to handle these situations. So that will be a beautiful thing.
And the ripple effect, you're right. I'm so glad you brought that up. The ripple effect is beyond us, is the next generation. And then
absolutely.
The next generation. So it's worth the effort. It's just, that saying of the greatest challenge or your greatest struggle will be your greatest victory. And I really believe that. And I think that this is very well worth the conversation and worth encouraging those around us that are listening to really to be willing to enter there. And so, yeah. Any other last comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that, there is there's the hotline number that you can call if you think somebody is being trafficked. But also, if you're worried about it and you're wondering if you're overreacting, some people don't want to call that number because they're scared to. I always offer to people that I'll have a conversation with you and, we can talk it through and, help you figure out what the best course of action is. For whatever situation you're observing. So I'm always willing to talk with people about that.
Awesome, Chrissy. And obviously we can reach you through Hope Against Trafficking. But on that note, everybody, there's always hope. And I want you to take every opportunity you can to share a cup of hope with those around you today. But I also want to put up this number. If you don't have it, please take a minute just to write it down and put your phone when in contact, right? Because if you see
an easier way to remember it is 888-3737-888.
Yep. So
it's very easy to remember.
Look it up. I just wanted to have it right in front of you.
I'm just saying, it's easy to remember that way.
But it is.
Yeah.
It is.
You're right. It is.
I'm always right. So. Just kidding.
Well, you are, though. You made some excellent points, and we're so glad that you're on. We really appreciate it. You do a great job here at Hope Against Trafficking with our residents, and I know we've got some we've had some great panelists. And who do we have next week, Hannah?
Oh, yep. So next week we have Chelsea Coleman joining us. She is with Youth for Christ, and they work in juvenile detention centers. And we're going to sort of continue the conversation about recruitment specifically, though, in those kinds of environments and how that happens, and just raise awareness about what's been going on in those environments. And so, we're really excited to have her joining us next week. So if you want to hear more about that, please tune in and be a part of it. So, and once again,
everybody have a good week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's Cup of Hope panel. We appreciate your time and hope you found it valuable. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that to provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of everyone at Hope Against Trafficking and the Michigan Abolitionist Project, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.